Hello, everyone, and welcome. So glad to see you all here. My name is Mary Statzer. I'm the curator of prints and photographs at UNM Art Museum, and I'm thrilled to have this event today with the film of Daniel Flores y Ascencio. It'll be a film screening and then a discussion afterwards. And so I'm just really pleased to welcome all of our honored guests that will be on the panel today. UNM Art Museum acknowledges the people of Sandia and Isleta, as we are now on the land that the Tiwa people have called home since time immemorial. We also acknowledge the other Pueblo tribes, as well as the Apache and Navajo peoples who shared this land before us and who continue to be integral parts of our community. We are grateful for and committed to every opportunity to further strengthen the University of New Mexico's relationships with the Native communities of New Mexico. Just want to make a brief announcement about one remaining program in relationship to the exhibition Art for the Future, Artist Call in Central American Solidarities. And that's a workshop titled Arte Voz Cuenta tu Historia, or Speak Your Story. Salvadoran American artist Muriel Hasbun, who explores issues around migration, displacement, as well as personal and cultural memory in her own work, will lead a storytelling workshop that uses art produced in El Salvador during the war and in its aftermath as a catalyst for telling the participants' own personal stories. So please visit our event page for registration for that. It's limited to 15 people, but it's free and open to anyone who registers. And again, that's Wednesday, November 17th at 4 p.m. So thank you again for coming to this special screening of AMA, La Memoria del Tiempo, a 2003 film by the Salvadoran poet and filmmaker Daniel Flores y Ascencio. The film is currently on view in the exhibition Art for the Future, Artist Call in Central American Solidarities at the UNM Art Museum, which is just across the street. Flores played a central role in the development of Artist Call. This amazing book was produced with the exhibition, and I encourage you all to get a copy. They're available at the front desk of the museum. And just an incredible resource about this really not well understood topic, which the co-curators, Erin Dugan and Abigail Satinsky, sorry, I'm staring right at her, and her name was like that part of my brain just a little bit too far away. Anyway, this amazing catalog and exhibition that Abby and Erin have put together. So we're so proud to host it here, and also to have this program today. The film screening is going to be followed by a discussion with Flores Patuch Gilbert, an indigenous activist from Acoma, and Justine Tiba, a representative from New Mexico's Red Nation. The conversation will be led by Violet Barton. Violet is a PhD candidate in the Interdisciplinary Humanities at the University of California, Merced, in the fields of Indigenous Studies, Critical Race, and Ethnic Studies. In her adolescence, she experienced forced displacement and dispossession by war from her native land, Cushcatan, is that correct? Also known as El Salvador. An indigenous descendant, Barton's research interests focus on indigenous forced migration, statelessness, and survivance. She is the recipient of several prestigious academic fellowships, including the UC Berkeley Human Rights Center Fellowship in 2022, the Fulbright U.S. Student Program Research Grant in 2018, the University of California Merced's Miguel Velez Award in 2018, and many others. She has a Master of Arts from the University of California Merced, and a double master's degree in public administration with emphasis in public policy development and healthcare administration from the California State University, East Bay. She has over 20 years of professional experience in public health and is a native Spanish speaker currently learning modern standard Arabic, Nahuatl Pipil, and Nahuatl. While at the University of California, Merced, she has received distinguished awards and recognition, including the Outstanding Women's Award in 2018 and 2 Social Justice Awards in 2017 and 2018. Please help me give a warm welcome to Violet Barton.
Good afternoon, everybody. Before I begin, I wanted to, first of all, acknowledge that I am in the occupied unceded territories of Indigenous nations who have been here for times immemorial and who continue to have a relationship with this land. I want to also thank them for their gratefulness to have me here and welcome me in their land. And thank you all for being here. Sure. I would like to also remark that I come to you to talk about a little bit about El Salvador, not as a scholar, but as a person who was born and raised there, which gives me expertise because that is the place that saw me being born and the place where I ran and almost got killed and the place that I continue to go back every time I can, and the place I call home. So, but before I go on, I would like to introduce 3 very incredible, powerful speakers for the panel today. One of them is our sister Justina Tiba, who is a member of this Red Nation, Pueblos from Santa Clara, Tesuque, and Acoma. She is in leadership with the Red Nation and a director of the Red Media. So thank you for being here, Justine. Also, Tata Betush Gilbert. And when I say Tata, this is an acknowledgement of endearment that now what people term uses to refer to elders who guide us, who give us knowledge, and who teach us life. So Tata Betush Gilbert is from the Acoma, New Mexico area, and he is a former University of New Mexico student, current president of Indigenous World Association, UN NGO. He is retired. He is a water activist and a tireless defender of Indigenous rights and a protector of water. So welcome to you all. And lastly, but want to also introduce Tata Daniel Flores y Ascencio. Tata Daniel is from ascendencia, his ascendancy is Maya, Ahuachapaneco, and Nonualca. He's a poet and a filmmaker. He lives between El Salvador and New York, where he was, he founded the now disappeared Institute for the Arts and Letters of El Salvador in Exile. That was fundamental for the call for artists against U.S. intervention in Central America, which is what brings us all here today as we look back into this movement and the contributions that it's made in our lives. In the 1980s, right? And so today he's here at the University of New Mexico to present the film La Memoria del Tiempo and to also share his perspectives about El Salvador then and now. That I don't know if you wanted to say a few words before we go on. So I would like to give you a quick historical account of El Salvador. And what we know, right? Mostly El Salvador is known for its 12 years of civil war, I want to say, right? Which took the lives of 77,000 people. Thousands more remain disappeared today. And millions of people, Salvadorans, are still internally displaced and without a home. And 25% of Salvadorans back in the 1980s were also forced to migrate outside of the country borders to international borders, such as myself. That's not all, right? The history of El Salvador is informed by years, centuries of colonialism, empire, and war. And before I go on, I want to situate you where El Salvador is. Most of you probably know and have heard the term the Northern Triangle lately in the last few years because of migration. El Salvador is one of several modern nations that make up what we know as Mesoamerica, or the region from Mexico all the way to the border with Costa Rica, right? Where many indigenous nations have lived there from many years, right? So El Salvador is the smallest Central American nation and also the most densely populated, with about 6 million people living in the nation and close to 1 million or 3 million people, I'm sorry, living abroad. So we have 14 states, or what we call departments, but because so many of us have been forced to migrate outside of the nation, the government created what they call Departamento 15, or the 15th state, which are all of us in the diaspora, anywhere from the United States, where the majority of Salvadorans live, to Australia and Europe. We are all over the world. However, you know, that constitutionally decreed Department 15 doesn't have a lot of legal rights. We are, in a way, we could argue that we may be stateless citizens because we don't necessarily have a voice. We don't think we do. So I'm going to show you some images that can be very strong content, but we cannot talk about El Salvador without resorting to understanding the violences of the nation. El Salvador's original name is Cuxcatan, which in Nahua people is a word that means jewels, a color of jewels, right? And we indigenous descendants people like to think of El Salvador as Cuxcatan instead of simply El Salvador. Through the year, right, the war in the 1980s left so many dead. People were disappeared and missing, still are. Many people forced to displace internally before, many times before they are forced to migrate outside of the country. And where I stopped is in the colonial histories, the histories of empire and war. What you are seeing here is the influence of the Catholic Church and the Spanish Empire, right, in the 1500s, which lasted through 1821, when El Salvador was part of the Central American republics as one nation who fought for independence against Spain. But that independence didn't mean independence for indigenous people. It just meant independence for the oligarchs and the Spaniards born in Central America to claim rights against the crown. And so that created a lot of tensions and set the stage for what is to come, what we are living today. The fact that independence took place in 1821 doesn't mean that the mindset that comes with colonization went away. We continue to have many practices from those times, and we live by those colonizing histories. What you are seeing here is celebration of the fiestas patronales, or the national holiday that we celebrate in August, that is to honor El Salvador, which is the name of the country given after Jesus Christ, because when the Spaniards fought over El Salvador, indigenous peoples resisted very vehemently and fought hard. And so when they finally lost the last battles, right, they called the country El Salvador because it was being saved from indigenous people. So this is, you know, in some way the legacy to even have the name, right? It's a legacy of colonialism. We also have been marked by centuries of US intervention and military regimes, dictatorships that have been killing people for decades. And this is very recent photograph that I took during an independence parade in 2018-19. where I had an opportunity to photograph the military. And what you would see and what I was sharing last night with some friends is that among the military parade that the Salvadoran armies that were parading were embedded U.S. Army trainers in full uniform of the U.S. Army. We also know that El Salvador has been framed within the Cold War context strongly, right? And we know that for the longest time, we have been called terrorists or communists every time we voiced our demands. So U.S. presence substituted the colonial powers of the Spanish Empire, and they are with us today. People resist, people protest, people, as you see in this picture, right? After the war, we signed the peace agreements in 1992 in Chapultepec, Mexico. And what happened was a series of treaties, neoliberal treaties that created not only a worse economic instability and climate for families, but forced many of them to start migrating during peacetime. We also have a lot of impunity, a lot of government corruption. And recently, even the government of the US was highlighting how corrupt our governments have been for years. We live in a militarized space with militarized police, where our daily actions, going to a restaurant, you have to eat with the guns next to you. And this is something that people don't understand unless you're there. And people, you know, you go shopping and you have to get past the guns. We don't talk about these things as much. But close to the militarized environment, we also have the latest thing is the state of exception that was instituted this year by President Bukele, March of 2022, where he declared a state of emergency and took away the civil rights and liberties of all Salvadorans, except he said for religious and cultural rights. He did this under a plan that he calls the Territorial Control Act, which he justified as to take control of the country from the gangs, from organized crime. But among the many participants in organized crime are many innocent people who have been harmed, whose families have been harmed. And once you are arrested, detained, you are there without rights. You don't have the right to an attorney or to be defended. You don't have the right to even tell your family where you're in. You're disappeared, forcibly disappeared. And this has happened to one of our Indigenous activists and his family. And I believe that Daniel Ascencio is going to talk more about this situation. We also have high levels of violence and poverty that create what we call, what late professor, Salvadoran professor Horacio Roque calls the living everyday death for Salvadorans. So violence and poverty, 1 out of every 3 people live below poverty levels, making less than $3 a day. A hamburger costs $7 a day. When we adopted the dollar during the neoliberal reforms after the war, the dollarization in El Salvador hurt families because they cannot afford to buy a hamburger, not even working a full day. So people migrate. Because of these conditions of everyday death, people are forced to migrate. And they may say they look for economic opportunities, but earning their food, it's a human right. It's not seeking better opportunities. Living in their home without fear of police or military extrajudicial killings or just, disease, hunger, lack of water. Those are basic fundamental human rights. migrating should be and is a human right that is denied to Salvadoran peoples. And so people who migrate are not wanted, are not loved, and some of them dare to cross the river. And most of you may recognize the images of little Angie Valeria and his father Oscar, who perished in the river and who were very brought to life in the media quite a bit. But this is not a one case. There's many of them. Many thousands of them are dying in the desert. But what we don't know about El Salvador that we are here to tell you today is about the perpetual histories of ethnocide and massacre against indigenous peoples. What you are looking at is a picture of El Llanito, which is in Western El Salvador in an indigenous town of Itzalco. This is a plaque, the only plaque that commemorates the killing of 30 to 50,000 indigenous brothers and sisters, mostly men who worked the land in 1932. They were killed by the government in a matter of 3 to 4 weeks. Their bodies are still buried in unmarked graves. Their families don't know where are their loved ones. And every year until recently, they could not commemorate because the massacre of 1932, which you will learn a lot during the film, created a culture of silence and invisibilization. And most Salvadorans today would maybe telling you that there are no more indigenous peoples left after the massacre because many who survived were forced to assimilate. Lately, indigenous communities have begun to commemorate since 2014, which is only 8 years ago. The government of El Salvador, for the first time ever in the history, acknowledged that indigenous peoples existed and recognizes through an an amendment of the Constitution. And they wrote Article 63, which is great. You know, finally, they see that we are here. However, the Article 63 doesn't give indigenous peoples any rights other than we are here. And so indigenous people continue to fight for their lives, for the land, for water, for food, for dignity, for justice. And I think, you know, let me go back. This is where Tata Daniel is going to talk to you later on about the movements that we have been organizing lately because of the state of exception and the conditions in which the country is. And so in the last few weeks, we have Tata Daniel has been doing a call for poets to defend the culture. And we have had a few events. One was the one that we did recently in October with Pedro Uc, Xiomara Cacho, who is Garifuna, he is Maya, Tata Daniel. We also had, oops, I'm sorry. We also had Poets en Defensa de la Cultura in El Salvador via Zoom with other indigenous poets and descendants. And we are here, you know, at the event. I'm sorry. Yesterday, we held this event, and today, right, the film that you're going to watch is going to give you a lot of insight about indigenous peoples in El Salvador and what the struggles are and how the struggles there may be similar to struggles here in the US. And so we'll come back to this screen for the panel, but it is, you know, the Hermandad of the Jaguar, el Quetzal y la Serpiente Estelar are working together with indigenous peoples from el Triángulo Norte, or what we call the Northern Triangle, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, to put together a Congress, right? And we are going to come back to that. And we have a transnational group of people, Colectivo Milpa, who are supporting this effort. So I'm going to give you that ahead of time, because what I want to point out to you is that what is happening today in El Salvador, the state of exception, the 55,000 people behind bars that are forcibly detained without rights, are not things that just happen today. They are connected to the histories of colonialism, empire, war that are not over and that continue to take place and continue to suppress our indigenous rights. And that's why we are here. So, Tata Daniel, I will you.
Thank you, Violet. Thank you. I just want to briefly welcome you to this screening. But before I do that, I want to thank UNM. I sincerely appreciate your invitation and the struggle to get me here. It wasn't easy, but thank you, Mary, for trying to reach me in the jungle of El Salvador. I won't be here without the efforts that the tough university have done to put this show together. I hope you all have seen the show across the street. It's 3 floors. I believe this show is going to go to Chicago after here. I appreciate all your efforts you have done through this year. After the pandemic, the COVID, it's been an unbelievable effort for Tufts University to put this together. I commend your efforts, and hopefully that these universities continue to support our struggles back home. You cannot take a show like this in the road without really committing to what is behind. And the spirit of this exhibition has been 1932, that our sister referred to. So the film is a portrait of indigenous families who survived the 1932 genocide. Enjoy it.